You let me know.
Right now.
Thank you, Maria. Hello, everyone. Welcome to VC the Venture Capital TV from La Token. Welcome to another episode today. So today we're going to be discussing about the investments in the space of BioTech and MedTech. And we have a fantastic speaker lined up as well. Myself, Sunny Mohanty, I'm the Regional Director of La Token here in Singapore. So we have two speakers today, Jeev Sahni and Monali Thakur. Welcome to VC both of you.
Thank you.
So
Thank
the
you.
format
Thanks,
is
Sunny.
welcome. So Jeev, I was speaking to you before. The format is going to be, just please help introduce yourself to our audience, and we'll go over the questions after that. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Sunny, and thank you for having me on the call. My name is Jeev Sahani. I work in a commercial excellence capacity for a company called BDO, Becton Dickinson and Company. However, I must say that, of course, on this call, I'm here to represent my viewpoints and insights, not BD's, so that's completely separate. I've been in the Middle East and particularly based out of Dubai for the last 8 years, and I've moved across into VC, private equity, healthcare, food and beverage, and marketing roles in the last decade of my career. And I find myself now more enthralled into medical devices, and that's pretty much the space that I'm in. I'm also an angel investor on the side, sitting on the board as an advisor and a non-executive advisor to certain companies in the spaces of healthcare and food and beverage. And I try and take companies across from incubation accelerator to Series A, and certain companies from Series B to C, in certain cases, of course. But that's basically my capacity over here.
All right. Thank you, Jeev. Thanks a lot. Welcome to VC again. Next, we have Monali Thakur. Hi, Monali.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you? Initially, we had a little technical glitch, but we're finally.
Yes, look at that. Yeah. So, thanks for having me. Nice to meet you, Jeev. I've just a little bit about me. I've studied biomedical engineering as my educational background. So that's where health tech and me sort of came together. And then I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, so I did my master's in technological entrepreneurship, so business of technology essentially. And then I thought I was too young to start my own thing, so joined a startup. And I was a part of the journey of a health tech startup company for the last 14 years. I've been with them. I'm currently a regional director for them for the Middle East and North Africa regions. So that's my primary track. I've always been very excited with entrepreneurship and innovation, and I have been a mentor with many incubators and accelerators, both in the Middle East as well as India. And gradually my angel investment journey started as a part of that. I've currently invested in a bunch of health tech and ed tech startups. So that's really and primarily I'm quite an active investor whenever I get involved with a startup. So there's a lot of mentoring, there's a lot of collaboration work, there's a lot of expansion work that I take on as a part of my investment philosophy for any startup. So that's me.
Excellent. Welcome again, Monali. So yes, let's talk about investments in the space. I'd like to start with Jeev. So what kind of recent investments have you seen into the space?
In the space of medical devices, I mean, let's try and size it so that we can understand the real opportunities over here. The size of the medical device industry today is somewhere on the lines of $530 billion the world over, with an estimated size capsule in the Middle East of about 800 to 900 million. And I say the 800 and 900 million because there's a little bit of facet and a caveat in terms of where it is that the missing 100 million goes from because of product registration and regulatory. The size of the investments, of course, differ between, and we're talking predominantly in the Middle East, they differ between $2 million to about $16 million, with the largest being about 16.2 million, which is what we saw in 2018 for a biotech company based out in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, for the localization of manufacturing. But other than that, it seems like with the marriage of digital, or everything digital with regards to AI, machine learning, as well as the Internet of Things with healthcare, you suddenly have another arm of of a service-driven medical device side that can actually go very, very well with the hardware that's already in the market today, which is something that is, it's new. It's something that's not really seen before. And whereas a lot of the investors today, when they're looking at companies, they try and consider not just a product approach, but also a solution selling approach to the company. So it's not just the products, but it's also products and services post sale for everything coming through. And the marriage of the two becomes very, very easy and very linear when you're able to try and merge technology into what it is that you deliver. That's very much where you'd want to play in today. And with the milestone year of investing prior to 2020, which was 2018, being some of the highest years in terms of collaborations, in terms of acquisitions, mergers the world over. We saw some massive companies go into mergers, MNCs to healthcare startups, right from Silicon Valley to the east of Hong Kong and even Shanghai. Today in 2020, we dealt with a massive blow across the economy with COVID-19. And it also gives us a huge area in terms of opportunity to consider the gaps that we see today in the healthcare systems and how does it we can fill in those gaps by finding not necessarily new products, but existing products, but how they can work together. I mean, that's exactly what we're trying to try and tie up over here. That's where you want to be at. And this is pretty much where the world is going to be at for the next 2 to 3 years once you come over this COVID hurdle. And I think we come out stronger if we're able to size the real problem correctly and address it in a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach, which is what's happened today with COVID. Yes. So that's where we are.
Absolutely. Thank you. I really like that proactive approach. Manali, you just mentioned that you've invested, an angel invested into many startups. We'd like to hear the recent investment that you've done during this period.
Sure. Before I go into my recent investment, just giving a little bit background about health tech. So Sujeet gave a background more about medical devices in that space. I think health tech is another space, or digitization of healthcare, if I put it very broadly, is another space that is really, really picked up in the last, decade or so. United States and UK picked up a lot more, but Asia Pac, this was the big growth segment that happened, estimated to be about 300 billion, by the end of 2022, or that's the market size. What I mean by health tech is anything that was traditionally in an offline mode now becoming digital and now becoming available at time of care to both the patient and the caregiver. The startup that I joined when I just finished my graduate program was into EHR systems, or electronic health record systems, which is the core of any healthcare organization. But being with them for the last 14 years and being in the space, I realized that, like every industry, healthcare is becoming completely consumer centric, right? So now it's no longer about the physicians or the hospitals or the clinics becoming efficient. It's more about what the patient experience and the patient journey is, and how you can make that superlative and efficient and error free. So on those lines, my investments have been around segments which may not be extremely innovative in that space, but are solving simpler problems in that patient journey. So one of my first investments was in India, a company called Meadow Healthcare, or Meadow Health. They basically, India is of course a huge population landscape, and there's so much you can do with that population. What they did is they wanted to standardize outpatient care. There's a lot that is being done in the inpatient services, insurance, other things, but outpatient is still extremely fragmented and extremely non-standardized. So what they did is they aggregated that to quote unquote Airbnb sort of, just giving a very simple analogy, an Airbnb sort of model for outpatient care, where a patient going to any Meadow clinics, pan India, will expect the same kind of service, have the same journey, have access to the same kind of healthcare, and digital health records available wherever their journey of healthcare is. So sort of giving that a very standard approach. Also, India doesn't give cashless outpatient, just like Middle East or Singapore or London or US, and that's a big opportunity as well. But the reason a lot of these insurance companies don't want to enter outpatient insurance is because they have no data visibility. They don't know if this is going to be a profitable product or not. And aggregating outpatient healthcare under one data set will give these insurance providers that, and in turn benefit patients like you and I to get that same cashless experience even in a country like India. So that was my first. I'm currently very, very interested and keen in digital therapies. So, looking into startups which are helping people with chronic diseases manage their diseases better. And, not everything is medical. And that's what people need to realize. As a holistic lifestyle impact or influence when it comes to managing chronic care diseases like your diabetes or hypertension or blood pressure, whatever that is. So digital therapies or therapeutics are becoming a big thing, and I'm very keen on joining um, that bandwagon and helping derive that. I also personally run an NGO. I'm a co-founder of an NGO that is in the cancer space, and we promote holistic cancer care. Chronic diseases are, not the same but similar, where lifestyle is a big part of it. So how you influence that to better impact your health and your conditions is my second investment.
Excellent. Manali, I'm really,
Fantastic.
impressed with the portfolio of companies that you've part of. I mean, they're very interesting. And the lifestyle diseases that you just mentioned, the chronic disease. I mean, obviously, I'd love to know more about that, after this, for sure. So
Sure.
I think you mentioned about the electronic data records. So it's a very kind of not fragmented space when it comes to data, right? So
Yeah.
what are the challenges? Because I just want to continue with that point from there where you mentioned how did you manage to consolidate the data? Like, it's fragmented. India is huge.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, initially when digitization of healthcare started, it was very core centric to electronic medical records. That is, everything that a provider or doctor that you visit to documents regarding your visit or your condition or your inpatient admission in the hospital or whatnot. So that was the primary goal. But slowly, there was a realization that it's not just when you visit the doctor's office, it's when you go to a pharmacy and pick up a prescription. It's when you go to a lab and get your blood drawn for a test. It's when you go to a diagnostic imaging center and get a test done. So there
Hmm.
is a lot of consolidation and interoperability, if you want to use the word, that is required for a patient to actually get informed, educated treatments.
Right. Yeah.
So that's one part. So the second phase of EMR consolidation was really interoperability and getting to, making sure all of your healthcare points are integrated. And then the third stage became, I as a patient use Google a lot now, and I use Fitbit to track my steps, and I use,
Awesome.
yeah, and I mean, I have a heartbeat tracker, which it sometimes panics me, but I have that as well now. So I have so much information with health trackers in my devices, and that's important information for a doctor to have. So how to integrate that now and pass that on to your physician so that they are giving you more informed care. Along with that, nutrition, of course, they say the six packs are made in the kitchen, not in the gym. So, what are you really eating, and is that good for your condition, and things like that. So that's really the entire spectrum of integration that I have seen over the last 14 years come together. It's no longer about what the doctor writes on his chart. It's so much more. Even so, I forgot to mention over the counter supplements, medicines that I take, things that people take for, when enhancing their working out, stamina builders, etc. All of that plays a part into your health, and that information should be available to the physician and the patient so that the treatment is correct.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally, totally. I mean, we all face the same issues. Like I run from hospitals to hospitals, and my data is I mean, not, it's always fragmented.
Yes.
So one hospital doesn't speak to the other hospital. That's a big issue. So, Jeev, would you like to continue with that? Like, how to tackle this issue? Would you like to take this question?
Happy to. I mean, and Monali, thank you very much for that. I think that's spot on in terms of making sure that your data points, your tech within an account or within the hospital talk to each other. Interoperability, in fact, is core centric in terms of making that happen. But Sonny, the question that you ask is also a bit of a loaded question, and I say loaded because you're dealing with very sensitive data at all times, and it can be as complicated as a series of medical or medicational anomalies coupled in with kind of therapies and diagnoses that I've run through that are definitely not public related. So the question over here is more in terms of proxy insecurity. How do you deal with that? How do you clean that data? And how do you use it to better understand where you need to go? So a lot of private accounts or private hospitals are averse to providing that data, but they're definitely a lot more comfortable with talking to you about it than government or public institutions are. Because you're dealing with the size of patients and dealing with that kind of data, it can be rather dangerous, especially when, if you don't have the right kind of proxies or the right kind of systems in place to be able to then regurgitate the right kind of information out. So, dealing with that becomes concerning. There are certain companies out there today in the startup space as well as in the mature space that deals with something called CQI, as a continuous quality improvement of data, which is more in terms of the analysis of medication delivery and patient trends, but also in terms of how the patient has reacted to that. So if you connect your BIS monitor to see a heart rate, and you're also able to understand how the medication delivery of drug A, for example, has effectively sort of, whether worked on you or has had an effect on you. So you're able to try and map out those trends. But also more importantly, and as Monali had also mentioned earlier, it's the world is becoming a lot more customer/patient centric. You try and understand from that space whether the kind of care given to the hospital is actually quality or par excellence. So you're able to then move away from errors and diagnosis, medication errors, dose error reduction softwares that have been out there in the market today. You couple that up with the Internet of Things, where you try and get devices to talk to each other, and voila, you've actually got a beautiful place to play in with in terms of telemedicine. So you're dealing with it from the hospital onward. So you're looking at lifestyle changes as well. Then I think now with technology having the need to grow beyond a plateaued area. I say plateaued because somewhere in the early 2000s, we started virtually climbing in terms of technological innovations, and we started plateau. And coincidentally, around the time that cell phones came out, and touchscreen phones came out, and that's pretty much where we started to horizontally grow rather than vertically. And I think now the need of the hour is to pick that right up there. And it seems that the need for that is also prompting an area for us to improve the way that we look at healthcare. And in fact, I would actually argue that in the next 5 years, healthcare is not going to be known as healthcare anymore. It's going to be known as health, because the enablement and the incumbent marriage between certain platforms. So data, containment, regurgitation, analysis, and feedback, that's going to be available at a touch point in terms of your hand right here. And if you're able to then deal with that and maybe have a point of contact, such as, it may not necessarily be a company, it could be directly a doctor, it could be a healthcare practitioner, it could be anybody that you confide in to be able to give you the right kind of medical advice for that particular problem or for that particular question. I feel that you can then roll that out towards improving your lifestyle to making it better. For example, I used to play rugby for my university. I played Division 1 and I dislocated my shoulder. I was out completely. Moved across in mixed martial arts, broke my nose, didn't work anywhere. Somewhere along the lines, I realized that I don't have a knack for contact sport, but I love it. I just don't have a knack for it. So I started running instead. And I've done 8 marathons ever since I've been in Dubai. So every 8 standard charters, I've finished them. And I've done 1 triathlon, which is the Ironman. I did that last year, the year before last. not really. I mean, it's done in Dubai, so it's the easiest triathlon, right, in the world. It's not in the mountains like in Norway. It's straight. But the question is, how did I get there? It just didn't happen over a 6 or 5 month period. It happened in terms of the last decade of understanding my capacity, my genetic makeup, my threshold, and also how do I naturally improve these abilities to work together in terms of performing out there. And I give sport as an example because that's really the congruence between cognitive thinking and your muscle system at the end of the day. And of course, if you want to use technology to annex that, and Manali, I think you and I might agree over here that if we don't go running or walking without our headphones on, you tend to walk a little bit less. So you tend to run a little bit less than you would. And trying to use technology to boost you into going to that area, I mean, music's just an enabler, is what it is. It's an enabler to where it is that you want to go. And I find that using point of care systems to analyze data in terms of the EHR headspace or the hospital information headspace uh, is something that we'd like to tackle. However, it's not the easiest place to start. It's more to do with in terms of what kind of quality of care is given at the first entrance, or rather the first point of care right there. What is the quality of care that's provided? How can that be measured? Can it be improved? And then there on out, whether you're dealing with patient records, to analyze the quality of care over a certain time stamp, can that be improved over a period of time that we can then capture within that period? And so when you're looking at investors coming in, when you're looking at advisors coming in into the space, you're looking at startups working around the space, I think it's very interesting in terms of how they're taking this through. I do think that sometimes that the objective that they have can be a little bit stretched, but I do think that they're in the right headspace in terms of thinking around the right lines. Although it's not the easiest place to start, is all I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah. Great insights there, Jeev. I really love it. I mean, too many information, which is good to have, and you are the perfect person to be a mentor to the startups. So very quickly, swiftly moving to the next question. So what has changed with the pandemic COVID-19 in terms of institutional and private equity investment in the space? Who would like to take this? I mean, what has changed?
either one. Manali, do you want to answer that?
I can give you my insights. So contrary to what I thought would happen back in March and April, when I thought people would want to keep cash or liquidity close to them and be a little averse to actually investing in startups or taking that risk. This asset class, though very exciting, is considered to be high risk as well, right? So I thought that there'll be some risk awareness there. But to my surprise and pleasantly, I've seen a lot of these startups getting investments in their seed rounds. In during this time, I think it's harder for people drawing larger checks to actually do those rounds right now during the pandemic, because everybody is focusing on business continuity plans and not necessarily wanting to take risks or invest. But I think seed rounds have definitely gone up from the way I am my point of view is that's definitely gone up. Even in the healthcare space, a lot of technologies to continue health care have come up. Telemedicine, as G mentioned, is one of the very popular ones. But besides telemedicine, there's teleradiology, there's so many things that we thought were just accessories and good to have. It was never considered mainstream, but now it is.
Exactly.
And
it's like you prefix the word tele to pretty much anything, and then that's a little niche for them to work in.
Of course. And
teleradiography. Sorry about my lack of knowledge on that.
Yeah. And I mean, and the surprising thing is, look at Middle East, Dubai. There were so many families that would go if there's a serious condition. They would, fly to London to get the procedures done, or they would, even to manage chronic care, they were consulting with a physician there, and they would go, often there. Now they don't need to actually physically fly anywhere. They can have that care. There are virtual room setups that are there where a clinic in or a medical center in London can set up just a virtual room with some medical assistants and nurses here and have the same exact care with those doctors that you fly to London for. So I feel
Yeah.
like COVID has made a lot of impossible things very easy to achieve. That's my view, and I think from an investment standpoint, new ideas that are definitely problem solving, not necessarily like a new device that walks and talks, but real problem solving devices and softwares are definitely getting seed investments. And I want to add, I mean, now this is me, the investor talking, but
Okay.
I feel like valuations had a little bit lost their ground
Exactly.
before
I was
COVID.
going to say that. I
People
was going to hip on that.
Right.
people would just pick a number, and that's the value of the company. Now I feel like a little more grounding has happened, which
Definitely.
is good for both the startups and the investors. Startups initially did not understand that getting a high valuation earlier round is not hitting the jackpot. It's actually then your ability onwards to keep up with those milestones and continue that graph of your valuation, hitting certain multiples.
Yeah.
Now with sort of realistic valuations, I think they'll look better when you look at somebody that's gone through series A or a bridge round and then series A, series B. They'll be able to attain those milestones without having the stress of, hey, I was valuated at 8 million in my first round and now what am I going to do? So I
Yeah.
think valuations have also sobered down, which I think is great, because then that allows investors to,
Yeah.
diversify more.
Absolutely, Manali. This has been a very consistent answer from all our speakers so far.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
value. Good. Yeah, thank you so much for adding that on to the today's session. So yeah, Chief, your thoughts.
I mean, spot on in terms of Manali, in terms of what you got in terms of valuations. I love the fact that startups have been forced to take valuations a lot more seriously rather than figure up in the air. That's the number that I'm going to catch. That's the number on paper. It doesn't work like that anymore. I mean, as an angel investor myself, I haven't been. I'll be honest. I haven't been very active in terms of immediate investment within companies, but as a robust portfolio or a plethora of trade products, that's pretty much where I've been playing in the last 6 months.
Right.
And at least in the medical devices space, I can definitely say that bridge rounds have gone down. Slightly serious investors have come up. At the start of this year, we did see that there was a little bit of a sheep mentality going on. So if there was, and you could see that on the stock exchanges, the stock indices across the world. You pick any continent, and that's where it is. Whether you're looking at DAX in Germany or New York or Nasdaq or BSE, what you're basically seeing is products that were popular were either overbought and they started to fall, and products that were not bought enough were underbought or rather undersold, and it would suddenly start coming back on top. So, such as, for example, let's talk about the app that we're on. We're on Zoom today. There was an incident that happened 2.5 months ago where Zoom on, I think it's New York, NYSE, Zoom's grouped in as ZZZ, right? And that's Zoom Technologies.
Right.
There's another company called Zoom Technologies. It's not ZZZ.
I know.
There's another one called Zoom Technologies. That company made $17 million overnight because people thought that was Zoom technology to invest in, and lost that money in the next 24 hours because they realized it wasn't the right company. So, so I'm just thinking, people have started to think for themselves, which I love and I really appreciate. In terms of micro investing and microfinances coming onto the board, VCs have been a lot less ruthless in terms of letting people come on board in terms of understanding the space that we're playing with, maybe come on board as an advisory faction to startups that do see a lot of potential. But I have to say this, that with regards to investing in the medical device space, whether you're looking at auto injectors, whether you're looking at certain pumps, whether you're looking at diabetes factions, I mean, now let's think about it this way. And since COVID is such a fantastically hot topic, let's boil on that a little bit. I've realized that in this day and age, ever since the start of COVID, you've had a massive drop in elective surgeries, right? And also a lot of oncology or cancer patients have been neglected from the point of chemotherapy over the last 6 months, which is a danger to both them and those around them. Because unfortunately, how do you become that point of care for them in the house if you're not qualified to be that point of care for them, right? And also at the same time, we've realized that there is an urgent need to be able to then diagnose and also treat these people remotely in those countries that are still facing lockdown today. So that's the area that you really want to play in. That's the area that you want to look at. Unfortunately, for a lot of medical devices today, it's easier to apply for a 510K FDA approval than it is to get a CE regulation or CE stamp on their product. The reason is because there's a lot of uncertainty and volatility around getting clinical trials conducted, tested, and assessed by European authorities, which is why most companies are now flocking across to the US, because getting a 510K approval definitely means that within a 12 to a 22-month period, you will most certainly, so long as your data is in check and your facts are right, you will most definitely see the light of day in terms of going to market. And a lot of companies tend to have subsidiary companies based in the US of certain arms out there. Now, what does that mean in terms of the investment space? This means that most companies that are beyond single asset, single retribution base will have a lot more opportunity to be able to play in this regard that they may not necessarily have had earlier. And you know, multi-asset companies tend to work very well because they have a portfolio that they can work on, whether a portfolio of companies or a portfolio of products. But single asset companies with a portfolio of products finally have a chance to play so long as they actually have a registration out in the US, or the fact that they're registered out in the US, they can play pretty much anywhere else in the world that acquires or accepts an FDA stamp on them. But also, let's face it, the FDA as well as the CE authorities have pushed for accelerated approvals, which makes getting investment a lot easier, because the need of the hour is to try and go to market today with a solution. If we can find a vaccine for COVID, number one, big problem that needs to be addressed. There are about 150 entities working across the world today, both in public and private factions, that are working on a solution for COVID in terms of a vaccine. We've also got to understand COVID-19 is a virus, it's not bacteria. So very much like the flu, you're going to have not one, but several vaccines for certain strains. It evolves because the virus evolves. It doesn't stay consistent. You're also looking at ways to be able to go to market with that. So, you know, looking at it from more of a customer-centric approach, instead of getting the person to the hospital to get treated, you want to try and look at an over-the-counter auto-injector solution to try and take that up. And that's the space that most people need to consider today. You're looking at auto-injectors for COVID vaccines that can be enabled. And if the world can develop that, you're implementing safety, you're protecting people, especially the elderly, as well as, you know, the neonates and the younglings, the young kids, from going to a hospital that may not necessarily be a COVID environment, but that's definitely putting them at risk for anything else. I mean, it could be COVID, it could be anything else. You're taking away that risk, which in itself is a big thing. That's where you want to look at. And at least from a medical device perspective, I do think that investors need to start considering ways to find solutions for things that were not over the counter to now being over the counter with regards to medication delivery and patient experience. That's what you want to focus on.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm really thrilled by talking to both of you and listening to your deep expertise and experience in the field. And absolutely, you know, I mean, over the counter should be, you know, investors should focus on those startups, you know, in that space who are looking into solutions for over the counter rather than, you know, going and queuing up in a big busy hospital where there is no social distancing measures. Who knows? Thank you. On that note, I'd like to have a question on the startup community. So because we have a lot of startups in our portfolio, but who are actually listening to us today. So, I mean, we talk about the startups. I mean, they have fantastic solutions. They have, you know, to problems. How these people are going to sustain post-COVID? You know, sustain, scale, and attract the needed investment. Now that they've seen the worst phase, I would say, because things are slowly, gradually getting better. But when we started off, it was really, you know, no investments happening. So, but post COVID, like we have learned the lessons, how can this sustain such a pandemic or crisis and still scale and attract the investments? Manali, would like to take this question?
Sure. I think to the startups and to my portfolio companies, I give two advice. And this is pre-COVID, pre anything. Whenever they have an investment, most startups, my typical questions before investments include how are you going to use the money?
Right.
And in good times, startups tend to have very ambitious spends or burns, I would call it, in areas where they not necessarily are going to get a return of investment. I think startups have definitely learned how to be better, make better use of the investment money that they have, make better use of resources, in order to for somebody to burn, in Indian rupees, or like 100,000 a month to expand, versus today, because they know that their next funding cannot happen for the next 6 or 8 months, they could actually drop that to about 45, 50.
Mm.
What is that extra spending for? So I think internalizing that and rationing that spend, to make your funding last longer or do more with it. I think that's one definite learning. I think the other learning is around making sure that you are agile. You come up with this idea at the beginning of, or the inception of, this is how I'm going to do things. Along your way, there are going to be companies that come in and solve some of those problems and are faster than you in solving those, or the problem itself changes to something else. If a startup is very headstrong and is unable to be agile enough to pivot as per what the requirement of the industry or the problem is, they typically land up in a situation where they don't see a way out. Because when you go to meet investors, when you go to meet business potentials or prospects, they're going to be asking you these tough questions, and you're not necessarily going to have answers to. So these two, and the last and most important one, for me, has always been around making sure that you're not necessarily wanting to be a jack of all trades but a master of one.
Right.
It's I mean, I do that a lot of times myself, but a startup needs to be open to collaboration. If there are two startups that are talking to the same consumer community and are solving different problems, let them both not try to compete with each other but collaborate. That is how their mortality rate, if you call it, goes down, right? They last longer, they can grow together. Yeah, they're not each going to become a unicorn individually, but together they will. And instead of competing, use each other's quote unquote customer population to tap on each other. I find a lot of startups very averse to collaborating with other startups. It's almost always a competition. I feel like that needs to change. A lot of large, I mean, if, just look at Reliance, for example, last year, pre COVID, they acquired close to 19 startups that were not at all close to their current business streams, but they looked at it strategically as things that they could expand into. And why bother building something when somebody else is already putting that energy and drive into it? And why not join hands with them and make it better together? I think startups being at equal levels also need to start thinking that way. So these are my three things for startups, and learnings even from COVID. So
Yeah, I think to your point, like don't compete. Find ways to
collaborate.
collaborate, don't try
Yeah.
to kill each other. I mean, that's a very good point, to be honest. I mean, I really like that. Okay, I just want to ask you, because you mentioned about pivoting, what is the successful use case you've seen in the recent time of that you can share with our audience today?
Sure. I think one of my favorites is Intute. I don't know if you guys know a lot
Yeah.
about Intute. Intute, in the cardio, if you see, when they started out, they wanted to do cardiac robotic surgeries. That was their big plan. And more than cardio, they wanted to do fluid extractions in cardiovascular cases and things like that. So it was a very, very focused niche that they started out with. And they got a lot of applaud for innovation, but they did not get sales, which is what is going to keep the gas
Yeah.
burning, right? So what did they do? They pivoted to certain other cardiac surgeries and tried to find space there. And then they tried to do some spinal surgeries as well. They didn't find. And today they are one of the biggest robotic surgery in prostate related
Right.
surgeries and urology related surgeries. Now, where is the heart and where have they reached? But they are huge in that space. If they were not able to pivot and meet the demand, because two things came out: the demand for such surgeries was high, and the skilled doctors who had a success rate of a certain or had specialization in that was not meeting the demand. So robotics, of course, would come in and help in that case. So they have to pivot and sort of become agile and get over their initial vision, but still solve a very relevant problem. So I think that's one of my favorite, where the company actually, were agile enough to switch. So
Absolutely great. I just Googled them. Thank you for sharing that success story with us. Chief, your insights, please.
Right. So I think Monali packaged that very, very well. I mean, the first is try and shoot your money for as long as it can go and as far as it can go. So learn how to be agile with that. Learn how to be agile with your solution, and learn to change when you need to change. Don't be so headstrong. But it's a very simple 3-step rule again. Since we're on it, let's talk about it. 3-step rule. Startups need to understand something, and this plan can change, but it needs to be reviewed on a year to year. Number one, IRR is not a definition of success. Do not bank on your IRR. It is nothing but an optimal point of where it is that you would grow in about 3 years. Do not submit 3 to 5 year growth plans because nobody cares anymore, right? You're looking at, or at least for investors coming in, you're looking at exit. It's very simple. What do you do and how do you go? As an investor, as a microfinancier, as well as an angel, I come in with a very hands-off approach to startups, but I grill them in the evaluation rounds, and I grill them in terms of the funding rounds, because I need to understand whether they know their product and whether they know their go-to-market very, very clearly. So number one, understand where you want to go. Number two, talk to who it is who can help you get there. So identify who, where, what space, which market will be able to get you to where it is that you want to go. And point number three is how can that space help you get to where you want to go? So if you identify these three, your trajectory is more or less painted in. I mean, I'm simplifying it to a very bare minimum, right? I'm crushing it down to the very base form, but in actuality, it is that linear path. Now, the way to get there is going to be a little more comprehensive, and that's where they need to dig deep. Um, Try and shoot your money for more than what it's worth today. Try and you know pull that on for as long as you can go. Be agile or resourceful. I think it's important to be able to change with certain times. And point number three would be more in terms of be honest. I mean, at the end of the day, let's be real. You either have a damn good solution to become a unicorn, or you don't. I mean, you're either a me too or you're a me only. Let me put it that way, right? So you decide which market space you want to play with and craft your go-to market strategy accordingly. Do not think you are the center of the universe, and do not think that things are going to be as simple, because they're not. Chances are a dozen that you probably have a very similar company on a different part of the world, maybe on a different continent, who's doing something extremely similar. Now, in terms of if you were to operate with a very small market, a niche market, or a small country, or within a country itself, by all means, go crazy. Yeah. But if your plan was to grow and scale upwards, I would take that advice very seriously. Even if I were to see myself in my shoes in a startup company, or heading a startup company from that standpoint, I would take that advice extremely seriously. And finally, of course, I think I'd want to conclude by saying, try and find the right mentors to be able to speak to. You may not necessarily be right about everything, and you may not necessarily know a lot about the market that you think you know about. So, for example, if you go into a certain hospital, you're trying to understand patient healthcare records, you're trying to understand how EHRs work and how they're tied up with healthcare systems. You may not necessarily know the proxy link between them. You may not understand the securitization protocols that are in place to be able to then use or extract that data and moving on out. Talk to people who know a little bit about it. They may not be very aware of the entire sector or the industry or the space that you want to play with, but they're extremely well versed. They are subject matter experts within the, as far as customers or your potential customers are concerned. And I think it's very important to listen to them because they've been with those customers for a lot longer than you have. An example of there's the example of a really good startup. There's a Danish company. I'll remember the name in a second, and if not, I can definitely shoot it out to everybody here. A Danish company that's focused on 3D printing. Now, they had initially talked about getting 3D printing across to the art world, so try and get paintings out of certain structures, and they were trying to sell them across to public holdings, museums, and retail buyers. They realize that in this day and age, the problem isn't the lack of a product, the problem is the product itself. And what they started doing in the medical device spaces is that they started to 3D print spare parts for products as an OEM manufacturer the world over, which I think is an incredible jump. So they moved away from that space that they played in for about a decade, which is just arts and crafts and structures and so on and so forth, and maybe played with a little bit of architecture and interior design, but they moved across to creating spare parts as an OEM manufacturer for a portfolio of 35 multinational companies the world over. And that happened over a period of 1.5 years. So you can understand the disappointment on the initial investor faces when they said we're changing trajectory, and the complete joy and upliftment when they realized that they were right. So, I mean, it's really important for them to understand where you're going to play with, how you're going to move and pivot accordingly, but also have a really clear go-to-market strategy on what you want to do. As investors, we don't care whether you, but at least investors like me, let me not generalize. Investors like me, I don't really care whether I want to be, whether you involve me in your day-to-day operations or not. I need to know that you know your product, and I need to know whether you know where you're going to play. And if you know where you're going to play and you know how you're going to use my money, then you have it.
Right.
But you need to know it, and that's what I want to know. So that's my humble advice to those out there.
Great point. Startups, if you're listening to Jeev today, please make sure you do your homework properly before you actually approach him. Thank you, Jeev, for those good insights. We just got a few more minutes. Before that, okay, we spoke about the startups. What about the VC investment best practices? I mean, we have two sides of the coin. I mean, so let's talk about the best practices as an investor that you would follow before investment. Manali?
I think from an investor perspective, and I don't consider myself a veteran to give anyone a lot of advice, but just my basic investment philosophy for any investor, whether it's angel or VC, is that choose companies that are solving problems, not necessarily just good to have or cool to listen to, because eventually those don't last. So solving problems is a I don't mean making a world difference, but making some inconvenience go away. I think that's important. And I as an investor have so far only invested in tech-enabled companies. So I've invested in fintech, I've invested in auto tech, very, very diverse, but tech being the backbone of it, because I understand that piece. But yeah, they're all solving very basic problems. I think that's important for you if you're looking at a large deployment of that technology or that software application service. The second thing is look for a founding team that is open to I won't say criticism, but I would say open to seeing the mirror, similar to what Jeev said. Open to understanding when the going is getting tough, and realizing that, rather than being in their own bubble. So I think mentorable and flexible founding team is important. A lot of investors believe age is important or where you studied from is important. I personally am not of that opinion. I have built teams in my career where I've worked with BCom graduates. It's all about the drive and the personality. It's not necessarily all about that degree that they bring in. So I feel like the personality needs to be analyzed. And otherwise, the good thing that I'm seeing is that a lot of VC and private equity companies that only touch startups in their very mature stage or green stage are now coming in earlier investments for two reasons. One, they want to catch a good idea soon enough and don't want to pay for the valuation they pay in their rounds. So they're going in, and I mean, the Sequoias of the world are doing that, right? They're putting in 40 lakhs, 50 lakhs in like seed stage companies. And Sequoia initially didn't even look at these companies without, you know, certain milestones. So I feel like that's happening. They're trying to get into some of these really nice startups fast. And the second thing is, it also gives them the ability with their experience to mold the journeys of these startup to success. So from a
Okay.
startup perspective, when a startup is already run for 4 years in a certain way and has done well, it's very hard to tell them that, hey, now it's time to pivot. But when you are walking that journey from an early time, I feel like it helps. So don't be averse to seed investment or don't be averse to angel investment. It may actually pay off a lot more. My multiple in going in an angel round to a series A is definitely way higher than the next. So think about it that way as well. Don't just look for mature startups. So from an investor perspective, I'd like to give that out as well.
Great point. Startups were listening to Manali today. So she, please make sure she's not looking for a mature startup all the time, but she's also looking for a
But
startup.
not all the time. I never look at mature startups. I feel that they're already way smarter than I am. I'm kidding, but yeah, I normally work with early stage funding.
Yeah, so she's working with early stage startups. Thank you, Manali, for your insights. Let's move on to Jeev for his insights.
Well, I would say from an investor point of view, and I think let's talk about the fundamentals of private equity and VC over here. And obviously, I poke fun of both my uncles who happen to be leaders in their own domains of venture capital. One runs one VC fund based on San Francisco, the other one's a VC fund back in India. But I poke fun at them when I say this, but I'll be honest. When considering when you're considering startups, when you're considering entities to fund in, brownfield or greenfield may not necessarily matter as it is to really make life a little easier for those people out there. And obviously, I'm being biased towards medical devices, and I'm taking points from Monali's answer, which I think was fantastic. I don't think I can do much atop that, but I could only add on to that, if anything, which is really see whether they're solving a problem or creating another arm of a problem. Let's not go that route. If you think that it's just convenient enough to marry technology to fill another gap or to build another arm of a problem itself, move away, because there's really no point building that. Because in the grand scheme of things, yes, you may very well invest. Yes, you may have a good return in whenever you exit. But in your grand scheme of things, especially if you're, building a portfolio, a diverse portfolio, do you really want that little marker right there? May not necessarily want that right there itself. It doesn't seem like it is versatile as a strategy to invest. I would take that forward. Another point that I would actually consider over here is give startups the room to play the way that they're comfortable playing in, if they've been successful doing so. Which is when you come into a round of funding, you go from, instead of going in a Series B or a Series C stage, they try and cash in on a really good idea early on rather than pay out at the valuations done at a much higher end. And I say this out of experience of taking a startup from minus 48,000 pounds to plus 50 million pounds in, half a decade. So my point over here is very simple. Let them play in an area that they're comfortable playing in, if they're doing well with it so far. What you can help out in is being choiceful in helping them decide where they need to make the right choices, the right decisions. Um, it's more of a driver or a decision driver than it is a decision maker approach, which I think is great because you let them really handle the problem. Startups, and obviously two startups, I'd like to say that it's important for you to come in from a slightly more mature mindset. It's important to consider where your VC or your investor is is looking at and where they're coming from. And it's important to take that perspective because it is a predicament in terms of how it is that you're going to invest and where that money is going to go for you and how you're going to use that. But more importantly for investors, turn that around a little bit and try putting yourself in your shoes. What would you have done differently? And if you could run game theory, which is obviously a really simple model, let's in base language is probability, right? If you could run game theory correctly, where would your decisions land that startup at in the stage that they're currently in? If you think that you do a better job over there, run the scenario with them, see what they would do differently. Because that's really where you start addressing the core cruxes of the problem. The problem may not necessarily be the product. It could be the structure of the organization, it could be the entity itself. I would really seriously reconsider IRR being the basis for investment. Really reconsider. I mean, I am really saying that. But I would more consider the kind of expertise brought to the table by those members in a startup and see what kind of backgrounds they bring in. Age, gender, education does not matter. What matters is experience and maturity, and in terms of their ability to move quickly in a lean, agile, and dynamic form. I'd want to look at that more than anything else. And that's really what I consider when I look at startups. And that's my humble advice to VCs and in private equity guys out there who are watching this. That's exactly what I would focus on. Understand the way that people move and understand how you could help them move differently, but don't make them move. Don't think you're the puppeteer at the back. Yeah. That doesn't work.
Thank you, Jeeves. Thank you, Jeeves. I just want to say that, startups within our portfolio, because last week we connect startups and investors. If you are seeing this episode today, I really thoroughly enjoyed speaking to Jeev and Monali, the young investors. I mean, the energy, the kind of information they have around this, in the subject matter experts in the area, I would say. And I thoroughly enjoyed moderating the session today, to be honest. I have to be very honest. I would love to have both of you on another panel because amazing ideas, amazing, like mentoring a startup, starting from the investment strategies to the mentoring a startup. I mean, fantastic. So before we
one thing before we go, sorry, it's come to my mind and I don't want to not mention it. I think startups, and this is for startups, not the investors, I think startups need to truly understand if equity investment is what they need and this is a learning from COVID times as well. If there is unit economics which is positive, profitable, do they really need to lose equity and get an angel investor on board if it's not strategic, or do they need working capital, or do they need debt, or it's not just one type of funding that startups need. Sometimes they don't understand that, and I tend to tell that to a lot of startups which approach me, that you don't really need my money, you need debt. You'll be fine without losing 15% of equity. So that's another advice, because you have startups as an audience. Please reevaluate if equity fundraise is what you need at this stage in your startup.
Great closing remarks from great closing remarks from Monali. So you have to assess yourself, equity or angel or debt financing. I mean, thank you. What about Jeev? Jeev, what are your closing remarks?
Well, I think that was it. The points that I made before in terms of the advice to VCs. But if anything, I would say be dynamic in your approach in terms of asking for investment. Don't always think that you come in asking for investment small piece of the pie. I don't really care about the pie. I care about my money back and whether I'm making a profit on it, if I were to really break it down in simple economics. But of course, be ready to prove to your investors or investor or firm in front of you, whoever, what have you, that you are in fact the company best positioned to do this. You may not have the right product, you may have the right product, but you may not necessarily be the right team. And be prepared to be challenged on those areas, on not just subject matter expertise, but also in terms of management and management style, because that's something that a lot of companies would want to try and take control of or break if they see a problem in. And that's my advice there. Closing remarks.
Great. Thank you, Jeev.
Thank you so
Jeev and
much.
Sonali, for being on our VCTV. So this brings us to the end of the show. You could actually go and view other episodes that is of area of interest to you on our website, www.latoken.com/events. And feel free to tell me like which one interests you, and we can always have another panel on very interesting topics. Thank you. Have a great day. Stay safe.
Pleasure meeting you, Jeev.